Thank you for joining us for another episode of Family Case Files TV show here on the Truthtainment TV Network and TLB TV. I'm your host, V, and today I have Jamie Johnson here with us as my co-host, and my very favorite legal advisor, Joanne Dennison. And Joanne has brought a guest on today by the name of Anthony Phillips. So let's get this thing started. Anthony, you're on today to talk about probate court because you've had a situation where your mother was, well, you and your mother were wronged by the system, and there was some inheritance or some estate involved. Let's get into that.
Tony's going to talk about his case. He's going to talk about his sister who inserted herself. His sister basically was approached by an attorney. His name was David Martin. And David Martin...
I believe she was approached by him.
Yeah, and David Martin wanted to get a hold of this, $4 million estate, steal what he could. More than four. Steal whatever he could and build the crap out of it. And after 7 years, they have built the estate $1 million. It's really only a $4 million estate. And the one main piece of property that's in there was very valuable. It was in downtown Chicago, and they wanted to get a hold of it, throw it into foreclosure because it had a loan on it. And that way they would buy it for 10 cents on the dollar. And the way they were doing that, the typical way of doing this is if it's a regular piece of property, you would go in there and you would ruin it. Okay, so everybody knows the old person that has the house in probate, right? They got the house. And what they'll typically do is they'll get a shyster realtor in there. I think Tony had a few shyster realtors. And they'll conspire with other people to ruin the property. So in other words, they'll shut it up, it'll grow mold. The roof will leak and it'll grow in the house. I know we talked about Linda Scully's case. They went and they cut the heating pipes. They actually had somebody come out and cut the heating pipes. The property froze during the winter and water just poured down the walls. They never shut off the water. Linda tried to get the water shut off and they interfered with that. They actually, I guess, had somebody at the city who said, oh, you're not the owner, you don't have any rights, and they literally just let the water run for about a month and ruined the property. So in Tony's case, he's got a vacant lot because it burned down. Some crazy story, I don't know if Tony wants to tell it, but apparently they had to replace, it was an older building, they had to replace the stairwell and the furnace or something?
Well,
he knows the story.
Yeah. The situation was this, that my mother received notice that her building at 630 South Wabash had wooden staircases, interior staircases, and these interior staircases that were wood were did not meet code. It was code when the building was built in I think it was a few years after the Civil War, okay? But since then, the code has changed, so now she was in violation of the code and had to change her stairs to metal stairs. In the process of doing that, the contractor had started the building on fire, okay? Now, after the I should say, while the building was still burning, we got a notice, and they told my mother's attorney to have us down in housing court in the morning. And we were there. They had a contract already drawn up, an agreed order such that the city would take over, in that the city would hire a demolition company. The city would pay that demolition company, and then my mother had a specified period of time in which to pay back the city for those bills. Well, what happened was this: my mother's attorney did not inform us that we only had 30 days in which to contest the city's bill in terms of the amount that it was for the demolition work. And they, long story short, they overbilled my mother considerably, okay? What happened is I was able to get my mother a line of credit because there was no mortgage on the property, and my mother used that money to pay off the city's inflated demolition costs. From there, what also happened at that same time period is this. This is where it gets complex. My mother's building had a building directly north of her, almost connected to her, right north of her, and a building connected south to her. The building south of the building that burned was also my mother's building. That's at 632 South Wabash. The building north of my mother's building that burned is owned by someone else. But what happened is the demolition company that the city hired damaged the building north of my mother's building, and the owners of that building then filed a suit against my mother, the city, the demolition company, and they were seeking damages for what was done to their property. The building that was south of my mother's building that burned, the city tore that building down entirely, and that was my mother's second building. And they did that without following due process of law. They did not inform my mother or her attorney that they were going to go and tear that building down. When that process started and I got wind of it, I went down there and I took pictures. The city started to make claims that, well, the building was damaged by fire. But you could see that the building was not damaged by fire. Now, why did the city go ahead and have the demolition company tear down the building at 632 South Wabash? It's my opinion the reason they did this is this, because they have wanted that property for years. They have approached my mother repeatedly. I've even talked to their people in the past, and they really did not want to come up with anywhere near what one would call a fair market value.
When the government wants your property, they're going to find a way to take your property. Mm-hmm. You don't think the government knows the best con artists in the world? Our politicians, the judges, the courts, they're the best con artists in the world. Why do you think no one can get away with any crimes and any con jobs? Because they know them all.
Yeah, this one was a good one. Yeah, they tore down a building they didn't have to, and
we got you back.
Cost of the demolition was 3 times. It should have been about $300,000, and the city charged $1 million to a tied-in wrecking company called Hennigan Wrecking. In other words, they passed off this business to Hennigan Wrecking, causing the building owner to have to get $1 million, $1 million loan, and then they used that as leverage when she got into guardianship to try and throw that property into foreclosure. But you can see all the finagling going on. We're not just going to tear down this building, we're going to tear down another building, and while we're doing it, we're going to go damage somebody else's property. I think that's the upshot of it. So that's a really crazy story, and that is sometime after that, Lorraine Phillips became more mentally infirm, and during all of this litigation, what happened was she was unable to take a deposition, and so she didn't have to take a deposition. They filed for guardianship, and then the vultures really circled, and that's when David Martin approached Tony's sister, Katina, and Katina's kind of an interesting character, but if there's anybody who is like a useful idiot, that's what she is. She's a useful idiot. She can be manipulated by the attorneys, and she won't do anything for fight with her brother. She'd rather fight with her brother than anything else, rather than realize that the attorneys are setting her up to drain the estate. And then what they do is they blame Tony, but Tony's actually just fighting for his rights in the guardianship. So that's how it started.
let me ask you something, Joanne, because I hear this all the time, especially with CPS cases. And Jamie, tell me if you agree with this. It seems like these people are always able to find that one family member that you don't get along with, doesn't like you,
Yeah.
is a scrupulous character that they will try to use against you. Do they interview these people and be like, hey, how do you feel about your brother? Oh, I think he's a jackass. Perfect. How would you like to join us in on this? Is there an interview process for this? How do they do this?
Yeah, they absolutely do that. They pit families against each other for that reason. They're going to find the one, and we kind of deal with that between the battle of the sexes within CPS and the father's right and the mother's rights. But in reality, it doesn't matter what sex, it is going to be the one that they can manipulate, period. Whoever that is, whatever family member, whatever friend.
I think the sister got involved. And I think out of probate, I think they have feelers out there. They know what's going on. Here's another interesting thing about our probate court system. When they get a hold of an elderly infirm person who's got money, substantial assets, they literally have a room on the 18th floor where they divvy up the cases, and then they decide what attorneys are going to work on them. So I would not be surprised when they got a hold of Lorraine Phillips. There was some kind of like little blinking light system, and they decided David Martin would represent the sister, and then they would bring in Paul Franciscowitz as the GAL. I believe there's a system for that. In fact, I know there's a system on the 18th floor. And as soon as your mother's name, because you filed guardianship, right?
Initially I filed by myself. Then my sister complained about it and she wanted to get in. I says, fine. Then we filed together, and we had the same attorney, Mr. Lou Prempis, an old friend of the family. And then Mr. Martin got to my sister, whispered in her ear, at least this is what I believe happened. He said, come with me. I'll get your brother out of there. You'll be the sole guardian of the estate. Your brother won't have anything to do with anything. You'll call all the shots yourself. And that was music to her ears. She jumped on that. The problem was that my sister, after the guardianship had been filed, she filed a lien against my mother. And that was the stake that would drop, that would kill the heart of her case in trying to become a co-guardian. So David Martin, my sister's attorney, then had to go through a series of tricks to try and shake me and for my sister to win by default. That didn't work, and in the end, the GAL, who was the David Martin's tag team partner on this, had to jump in, called in the Office of Public Guardian, and under their name and in their, let's say, influence, what they came up with and what was stated by Wendy Capoletto was that if I did not sign an agreed order accepting my sister as a co-guardian with Associated Bank as the corporate fiduciary, and I would be the other co-guardian, my mother would be put into a home, regardless of the fact that my mother was living in her home, which was a nice home in a nice neighborhood. My mother had bought the home in the 60s, and it was all paid for. She intended to retire there and spend her life out there, regardless of the fact that the guardian ad litem had already seen the house and found no problems with it. He couldn't find a problem with it. That didn't matter. And it was in the email from Wendy Capoletto that despite my mother's current situation, and what was meant by that, what her current situation at the time was, there was a prospective buyer for the downtown properties, and we're talking a sum of $3 million plus was being tossed around. In other words, even if this property sold and my mother came into $3 million plus, that didn't matter. She would still have to go into a home if I didn't sign the agreed order. But if I signed the agreed order, then my mother wouldn't have to go into a home, all right? And then everything would be fine. We would continue, all right? And that was the first ruse, all right?
Oh, okay, well, let me jump in there and say, I mean, what country are we living in? Well, I know what country I'm living in. What country is America anymore? To me, that sounds a lot like, well, not only is it medical kidnap, but it's sort of on the lines of, I mean, how does probate even get into the situation? Because if a person has assets, a large piece of property, nice home, good living conditions, who then has the right to even bring up a home at that point? I
Well,
mean, I don't see how it's even possible.
Right. And technically, she had a power of attorney or whatever, and Tony had been taking care of her already for many years. That should have continued. But of course, the probate courts can't make money unless they declare the need for a guardianship, appoint one or two guardians, and I'm like I'm telling you, I know for a fact they divvy up the cases on the 18th floor. So in other words, what came in was the estate of Lorraine Phillips. They had Luke Prempus, who was a longtime family attorney. So the first thing they do is they get that attorney off the case. Either directly or indirectly, it was made clear that he is not to show up in that court. And they can do that either by talking to directly, friend of a friend or whatever, or they can make it clear he's going to lose every single motion and his presence is not needed or wanted. At the same time, they have their tied-in attorneys, in this case, Paul Franciscowitz and David Martin, and they get together with what judge is going to get it, because the judges get bribes and kickbacks. I mean, I've documented that on my blog. They do it through the property records, and then they decide what attorneys are going to get involved in that case, and even the case managers. We have two primarily corrupt case management systems in the probate court. One of those is Magnolia, and I think Tony was dealing with Magnolia. They came out, and their whole modus operandi was anytime the attorneys would call them in, they would say the home's not fit, no matter what was going on, like Tony said, no matter if the house is clean, if the person wants to live there, if it's suitable, they will come in and say the house is filthy dirty and the warden can't live there anymore, and they'll come up with any excuse they can. So it was interesting at one point when I was helping Tony on the case, I said, well, if they're sending out Magnolia, just meet them at the door and ask them if they can record. And it was even a weird situation. They were trying to pull something else during the case, and they came out of what, Christmas Eve? They came out of Christmas Eve to no, it was New Year's Day, wasn't it?
I don't, there was something, now that you mentioned it, there was something around the holiday, and it was unusual that they would come out on a holiday. But what I think Magnolia was basically up to is they wanted to create work for themselves. So they would insist that the house was not clean. What I had done is this. I had told them, I says, well, I thought it best to take a video of them while they're in the house inspecting the house. This way, I can come at a later date in court and show the video and say, these are the people from Magnolia. This is the condition of my mother's home when they were in it, inspecting it, so you can see on the video yourself. Well, two things happened. Both Magnolia and the GAL, both of them did not want me taking pictures of anyone, either people from Magnolia or the GAL, when he came out to the house. So they didn't want anyone, or they didn't want me taking still photographs or videos of anyone the court authorized to bring into the home, okay? I objected to this. I sent, that was one of my many complaint letters to Timothy Evans, the Chief Justice. And Timothy Evans, he has a rubber stamp up there, and his answer to everything is get a lawyer. In any case, the judge on the bench at the time just overruled me and said, no, you can't take, the order came down, you can't take pictures of these people while they're there. Eventually what happened is my sister came around. She said, we were in court the same day. Magnolia's people are there telling the judge the house is filthy, it's terrible, there's a need for Magnolia's people to continue to be there and build the estate, you know, essentially. And my sister came up and said, no, the house is really clean, blah, blah, this and that. And so the judge went with what my sister said, and Magnolia was out. What Magnolia did was, one thing they did that was just a little bit unusual, out of the norm, is the two women that came into the house, they also brought this gentleman in who looked like he was, oh, I don't know, he was about my size, maybe a little bit heavier. And well, let's just say he didn't look like an intellectual. And I asked, what was the reason for him being here? Are you part of the inspection? No, he's just with the Magnolia. So I think they felt maybe threatened by me coming into my home and acting in the way they were acting, and they wanted someone there to sort of counter me in case I became upset or if I got loud or abrasive in any manner. So, but, you know, and why they're bringing these third-party people in, nothing ever happened. When Magnolia's people came into the house, I let it be known, you have full run of the house. You can go anywhere you go. I'm not going to follow you around, but what I want to do is I want to take pictures. They said no. They left. They got the judge to say, I can't take pictures. Then they came back. Same thing. I said, you have the freedom to go wherever you want in the house, and I'm not taking pictures. So then eventually, you know, it got into court, and the judge decided to listen to what my sister said instead of Magnolia. But,
well, I think the lesson here is really don't ask permission. Just
Yeah,
the court.
don't ask. I told him, just
No.
You have every right in the world to record somebody, especially on your property, in your home, to record them.
Right. Well, that's what I started that. I had their initial on their initial visit to the house. I had the camera set up, and I had a still camera with me, a 35 millimeter camera, and I informed them that I was going to videotape what they were doing, what they were looking at, the condition of the house when they were there, and they were upset with that. They said, no, we don't want that. So they left, and they didn't inspect the house. They complained to the judge. The judge then told me I have to allow them to come into the house, and I am not to take any photos or videos of them while they're there.
But the court doesn't have the right to do that. All right?
But they did it.
No, but they never put it in writing. There is no court order that barred
Right.
you from recording Magnolia. You will notice that. And I'll bet you it's not even on the transcript if you go back and look at that transcript.
Well,
I'll bet you that just.
I'll bet you're pretty pink too. But I gotta ask you something.
Now, you're telling me that now, but I've never read it in the transcript. I've been through his court orders, and I still have to send you the documents. I've been through all of that. He's got a 7,700 page record on appeal that I will be sending to you. Okay. And
Okay,
it documents the case and what happened, but there's no court order saying she can't record.
Well, let me ask you something though. Isn't there something? Because I'm always looking for solutions here. Isn't there something that can protect an elderly person against the state? Like, let's say they have a living will of some kind. Says, okay, well, if I'm ever taken by probate court, my property is to immediately be divvied up between, you know, this person, that person, and another person, etc. Or because there's too much of this land grab with this government stuff. There should be something to ensure that property can stay within, you know, the family.
Well, the best thing to do is really, you got to do the power of attorney for health care and property. That should be done well in advance. And then you should also have a will and a trust. And the reason why you have the will and the trust is because the trust usually keeps all the money. And in order for them to get to that money, they would have to break the trust. Once they break the trust and you pour it over into the will, now they've got to break the will too. So now you've got a backup. But the most effective thing to do is to really get that money in offshore bank accounts. Barclays Bank, we know Bank of Cyprus, right? Those banks do not respond to U.S. court orders. And that's the only way to do it. And if somebody comes after you in a guardianship, the only people I know that have gotten out of it is they fled the country. There was one lady in Greece, I think she did that. And Karen Federighi did it. She fled down to Mexico. She still hasn't gotten her money back, by the way, or her property. But she is back in the United States at least. And then there was one lady in California, and she had, I think, $4 million. She wanted to give $1 million to each of her kids. She knew that was going to end up in probate, and it did. But what she had done was she had sold her home to a friend and then leased it back, so she still, could live there when she came home, and she bought an RV and she traveled around the country. However, that did not stop them from trying to go after her and getting that $4 million back from the children, guardianizing her, but it never went anywhere because she wasn't a resident of California. I do have a case right now where it's actually, the lady's name is Janet Badine. She's going to kill me for talking about her case, but I don't really give a darn. They went after her mother in probate because Northwestern Memorial Hospital had committed malpractice. Jamie, have you heard of this? In order to cover out malpractice, they do state or medical kidnap, right?
Oh, we just went through that. Yes, yeah. It happens all the time. We had a big case in Arizona where they did that. And in order to do that, they took a boy's colon out, for goodness sake. A 15-year-old, no court order, no, due process.
That's
absolutely.
Absolutely.
We see this every day.
So I'm gonna Facebook message you, and I'm gonna get that case from my blog. But in her mother's case, I think they got millions of dollars. This is Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I think they got millions of dollars to conduct some kind of a study to watch pancreatic cancer grow. Her mother was having abdominal pains, and twice a year, therefore, they were calling her in, and she was getting an MRI. What they weren't telling her is they were watching a pancreatic tumor grow from a polyp, from a benign polyp, all the way into full-blown metastatic pancreatic cancer that invaded the hepatic artery. And then when they found out what they had done, because Janet is actually really smart. She got all the medical records. She figured it out. She got the records on how they were getting money for this pancreatic cancer study. So she put 2 and 2 together. But what she wanted to do was get her mother into cancer rehab to build her up and all that. And once it was discovered, all this underhandedness, they blackballed her and they sent her home to die. So now she can't go to any hospital because she's been blackballed. They won't send her to cancer rehab because they don't want anybody else to know the story. And approximately a year later, she did die. Now, wait a minute, it gets worse. Janet has a disabled brother. He's quite well functioning, but you can tell he's a little bit not there. You know what I mean? He's probably 90% there. He's a nice guy. In some ways, he's really smart and perceptive, but in other ways, he just can't handle certain things. So now that her mother's died and she filed a lawsuit and all this other kind of stuff, and I kind of warned her, she got about, $200,000 out of these lawsuits for what they did to her mother. So now that's getting paid to her and her brother. And guess what they're doing to the brother? They're going after him to guardianize him to get the money back in attorney's fees.
Get the money back.
Right.
Wow.
So this is what she's trying to get the money back, right?
Wow. Well, okay. So with Anthony's case, where does he stand right now? I know his mother has passed, and what's the exact situation right now at the moment?
Well, there's a number of issues that are going on. If you to get a better understanding of one of the cases that I have filed, it's against my former attorney. It's against David Martin, against the GAL, even against the Judge Cesario, okay, and some other people, Wendy Capoletto from the Office of Public Guardian, Brian Holmes from the Office of Public Guardian. In order to understand the case itself, I'd have to give you some background information so you'd understand what happened. Basically, this is the situation. My mother had that situation where her building burned down, and there's a litigation going on from that case. There's a total of 3 tort cases my mother was facing prior to the guardianship. My mother had hired an attorney, Miss Lane, to handle those tort cases, and she had been working handling those cases. Now, we go into the guardianship, and what their objective is they want to gain control of the estate. They want to get into a position whereby they eliminate the litigation against the city and the city's friend, the demolition company that did all that damage. They don't want to have to pay out for the loss of my mother's building. The loss my mother suffered as a result of them tearing down her building. And they wanted to gain control of my mother's estate so they could sell off her property to friends of the city who have wanted this for less than a fair market value. Now, the legal aspect is this. Mr. Martin has a client, my sister, who has a lien against my mother. And therefore, he realizes that if any judge, despite how much the judge is in their pocket, if the judge rules in favor of my sister against me, that would be overturned on an appeal. Then we'd be right back at another trial to determine who's going to be the guardian, and my sister would lose out entirely. Martin would lose out. His bank, Associated Bank, would not get the case. And they want to do everything they can to stop that. So what Mr. Martin did, his first trick, number of tricks out of his bag, was this. He got Sally Griffin to testify under oath in a deposition that the Associated Bank found me unsuitable, okay? Gave no specific reasons, but basically I was unsuitable and they couldn't work with me. Therefore, they withdrew from my petition as my bank, my corporate fiduciary. Without a bank or corporate fiduciary, my petition won't stand, it'll be dismissed, and my sister will win by default, okay? What I did is I went and I got this new attorney, her name was Brusgall, and she got a bank for me. So what Martin did then was this. How do you get rid of the bank? Again, you got to knock the bank out. What he did is he told the bank he wanted to depose them. Now, the reason for the deposition is Martin was hoping that would be enough to dissuade the bank from taking me on as a client. They would walk, and then I would once again have no bank, corporate fiduciary, and my sister would win by default. But that didn't happen. The bank showed up, their vice president and their lawyer showed up at the deposition. And what kind of questions did Martin have for the bank? You know, he actually asked the bank, and I mean, when I say bank, this isn't an online bank. This is a bank that is a brick and mortar establishment here in Illinois. He actually questioned them as to whether or not they were operating with a license, and he questioned the people that were working at the bank. He questions their credentials, their background, their capacity to do this type of work. What is their work history record? Went on and on, found nothing wrong.
That sounds like desperate intimidation right there.
Right. But this is, see, he was trying to get the bank to withdraw. They didn't withdraw, but fine. So he's got to go through with it, and he comes up with the best lame questions he can. And after all, he's going to get paid for it in the end, so that doesn't matter. But at least this, he made his attempt. That didn't work out. Then what he did is a number of days later, he came up and he filed a motion, went before the court, because now the situation was this. You understand? Prior to having Sally Griffin withdraw Associated Bank as my corporate fiduciary, Associated Bank was on my sister's petition and Associated Bank was on my petition. So no matter who the court ruled in favor of, either me or my sister, Associated Bank was guaranteed of the business. They were going to be the corporate fiduciary. But after Martin had Sally withdraw on mine, now there's a 50-50 chance. And with my sister having a lien against the mother, it really doesn't look good for Associated Bank. They're out the door. So he comes into court and he now says, well, I have this law that states that because Associated Bank was on the petition to start with, they can't leave, they have to stay there. The judge, even the judge, which was in my opinion, was in their pocket and working with him, just says, no, I can't go that far. No, so that didn't work. There was another stunt that Martin pulled. I can't remember. I have it written down. But eventually what happened is David Martin ran out of tricks. It's at that point his little buddy, his partner there, Paul Franciscowitz, the GAL, he jumped in. Now, the GAL had already done his report on the home. Nice home, nice neighborhood, no problem. Couldn't find any problem there. He one day approached the bench and said to the judge, I think there's a need to have someone from the Office of Public Guardian go out to the home. And the judge didn't even ask him why, and he didn't say why. The judge says, fine, go ahead. So this guy comes out to the house from the Office of Public Guardian, Brian Holmes, and now he writes up a report. That he gives his report to Wendy Capoletto, a woman at the Office of Public Guardian. She sends an email out, which makes its way to my sister. And my sister faxes it to me because at the time I didn't have an email. I didn't know how to use it or wasn't using it. Anyway, in that fax, that's the fax that stated, the fax of an email from Wendy Capoletto that stated that despite my mother's current situation, she's going to come into $3+ million on the sale of the property. She has to go into a home, okay? They have no plans for her staying where she's at, okay? And then I'm told my lawyer switched on me. They got to my lawyer because originally my lawyer was fighting this case, and she was, we're gonna go to trial, and you will win at trial because the judge cannot put someone who has a lien against the ward as a guardian of that ward. Now all of a sudden my attorney Brusco switches her story. Well, you don't know what the judge is going to do. And she's now talking settle. Let's settle. Just settle with them. Sign the agreed order that they want, okay? And that's when I'm told at that point by the GAL and my attorney that if I don't sign the agreed order, my mother's going into a home. Now, here's where it gets even better. I tell my attorney that, listen, you want me to sign this agreed order. There's something I have to get out of this. There's something that has to be, in here. And what I want is this. I want the attorney, Lane, who has been handling my mother's 3 tort cases prior to the guardianship. I want her to remain as the attorney of record in handling this. No problem. We can do that. That's no problem at all, okay? So what they did is this, to skirt that issue, to manipulate the situation, is the agreed order that they had drawn up with my sister and I would be co-guardians with Associated Bank. That remained the same. What they did is they drew up a side order. And in the side order, it said that my attorney, Joanne Brusco, the attorney, Najula Lane, would remain as the attorney of record, okay? And my attorney, Brusco, saw all of this and saw what was going on, right? That I signed it. We went on for X number of weeks, and then all of a sudden the judge decides, I don't think that Lane is a competent attorney, and I'm gonna rescind my previous order.
Without filing a petition. Nobody filed a petition.
And this was done. Now, it's my contention now that I understand the law better is that my attorney Brusco, in my best interest, should have said at the time, my client wants that Lane remains the attorney of record. Therefore, her being the attorney of record must be within the 4 walls of the agreed order that establishes the guardianship and who's going to be the co-guardians. It can't be in a side order that can be struck down later on. I walked out of there and I wanted one thing as an agreement on this, and I got nothing. once they had that, then what they were able to do is get rid of Lane, install these other attorneys who were lamos. They're going to do what the court wants, okay? And what they did is they dropped the ball on my mother's third-party counter-complaint to collect millions of dollars for the damage to that second building, and my mother just got a very small fraction of money of what she should have had in a out-of-court settlement with the city alone, not with the demolition company, because these new attorneys that took over said, listen, we can make this settlement with the city. The case is not over with yet, and you can still pursue the demolition company for the full value of the building that your mother lost. And this outside settlement will make it now, and it's best for this reason, that reason, blah, blah. It's best to make this settlement with the city. And that was a settlement with $450,000, okay? So they went with the settlement on that, all right, from the city, and they got the $450,000. But what happened is this. The attorneys, the new attorneys, the firm of, we'll call them A&C, Andrew and Kesson. A&C thoroughly dropped the ball in terms of pursuing the third-party counter-complaint. My mother did not have her side represented properly. Therefore, she was not compensated. The owners of the building that was damaged by the demolition company that the city hired, they now are suing my mother and everyone else. And this lawsuit goes on, and this is like a 6-year, it's going on for 6 years. And as we approach the end, the last 6 months, that's when the court removes Lane, puts in A&C, and when we get down to the very end, okay, we're talking when the jury is ready to make their decision, okay, they come up with this settlement, and the settlement is an offer to settle against my mother for $300,000, all right, and I got wind of that. I sent my sister an email telling her, do not agree to settle for the $300,000. There's no way anyone can find our mother guilty of what the demolition company did. That was their business. We had nothing to my mother. Our mother had nothing to do with that demolition company. Any damage they created to someone else's business and building is their business, and you can't blame our mother. Well, the GAL has some convoluted logic, which he later spewed out in court, that they really, that it was best to do this $300,000 settlement. But what they did is, because my sister showed them the email from me stating explicitly and very firmly, do not make this settlement, what happened is this. There was a scheduled court date. And when I went to that court date, I just happened to bring my own court reporter that day, the first time. And they said, well, this court date is not being held in a courtroom. It's being held in a small room that sits behind the courtrooms, okay? And because of that, you can't bring a court reporter in there. And the judge, when I was in there, the judge told me, Judge Cesario said, you can't take notes while you're in here. Okay, the only issue discussed that day in that small room with no court reporter was the issue of the $300,000 settlement. I was against it. I wouldn't do it. Okay, my sister was talked into it, and Associated Bank does whatever David Martin says. He controls their vote. They've outvoted me 2-1. They made the $300,000 settlement. Then what happens is, about within 40 hours later, the jury comes in and rules against the plaintiffs, right? So essentially, they took that $300,000 and squandered it. Now, it's my contention that $300,000 was more than $300,000. The reason being is this, that $300,000 could have been used to develop my mother's empty lot as a parking lot, just a one-level parking lot. My mother, prior to the guardianship, years prior, she had made moves in hiring an architect to draw up plans to do just that. We were trying to go in that direction, okay? Mm-hmm. If we had taken the $300,000 and developed it as a parking lot, the estate would have become financially self-sufficient because it would have had an income. But that's not what they wanted. They wanted to keep the state destitute, and that's the reason for selling it at a less than fair market value. And who did they sell it to? Well, the real buyer who wants it. Because of what happened in the past, this is an old situation that goes back years. They wanted to kind of distance themselves from it, so they got a straw man from a business from down south who never does business in Illinois to come up here and buy the property. And it's just been sitting here all along because I know where the property's going to eventually. It is Columbia College that wants that property, has wanted it all along, and I've discussed it with their people, and they were just always way too low on their price. In any case, that's the way they manipulated that situation. And out of that $450,000 that was settled from the city, $300,000 was squandered there. They took the other $150,000 and they gave it to the law firm of A&C for basically being their little stooges and doing what they wanted. That was their.
You know, I can say, and you know, this whole not being able to have a court reporter and not even to write notes. If the law isn't a matter of record, then there is no law. To me, I mean, that's how I feel about it. I mean, with the CPS and all stuff, I don't know, Jamie. I don't know how you feel about that.
I could add one more thing to it, and it came up, and it was very recent. Okay, in the guardianship case, we are on our third judge. Okay, the judge that was there originally in that small room with no court reporter, that was the first judge. Okay, now we're on the third judge. On this third judge, he just came on board, but in the first time, I believe it was the first time we had a court date with him before him, he talked about on the next court date we're going to get together, and we may not hold it in the courtroom here. It may be held in a small room. Bingo! Light went on. I said to the judge, I says, Your Honor, will there be a court reporter there? And the judge says to me, words to the effect, he either said it's the law, there has to be a court reporter, or there has to be a court reporter, it's the law. Words to that effect, right? Now the GAL is there. David Martin's not there that day, but the GAL is. I get the transcript back, and that's not on the transcript.
You knew it.
Wow.
That happens a lot. And you know, I've noticed so many things in here you're talking about. The switching of the judges, the attorneys switching, the fact that they have this, you know, this brotherhood, this unity, this some reason they're going to work together to make sure they get through it. And a lot of this, I took some notes here. And number one, the threats from the gall and we have CASA constantly dangling, you know, what is yours is property, or your family member that is an elderly or disabled. In our court, it's the children that they literally dangle over the parent's head. If you don't do this, you're not going to see him. If you don't do this, you're not going to get phone calls. No pictures or videos. That's another thing very common in the child welfare cases as well. I don't know how many cases I have been kicked out of, like family team meetings and stuff, because I want to record. One thing they always say about that is it's confidential. Well, I try to remind them that, well, this is the party right here, and it's their confidential, and the only way that it's illegal is if you release it. But they're constantly putting you in fear.
The confidentiality belongs to the parents. So if one parent wants to waive it, there's nothing the state can do about it. The state owns no rights to any confidentiality. It's really up to the parents, and they need to be reminded of that. And also, if you're having problems with the transcripts, remember, you can always subpoena the audio. I don't know if you've tried to do that and where that's going, but also report the court reporters to the state disciplinary board. Okay, so that's really important too. Also check to make sure your court reporter's licensed. During my ARDC trial, at the end of it, after the court reporter had billed the ARDC $10,000, and then the ARDC went after me for a judgment, which I have refuted. I told them they can jump in the lake on that. I found out my court reporter hadn't been licensed for 10 years. Now, why is it they chose a court reporter who had not been licensed for 10 years, right? And she must know what she's doing because obviously we all know we got to pay our licensing fees every year. And that really comes back to the fact that they're using a court reporter who is so unethical. She doesn't have a license, and that way they can change the transcript exactly the way they want. And it's very interesting because they did change the transcripts because in some Perry Mason moment, I cross-examined the judge who was coming after me. I got her on the stand, and I got her to admit she was lying. I got her. And the first question was, did you take Gloria Sykes, who was a probate court victim, and have your deputies lock her up and threaten to euthanize her pets? Oh, no, I would never do that. And, of course, everybody goes nuts. The whole courtroom goes nuts, and then they all settle down and ask some other just, basic, easy questions. And I went right back into it, and I asked it in a different way. And I said, how many times have you chained somebody in your ante room? And then she goes, that was the first, and then she goes, let me correct my answer. I have never chained, and that disappeared off the transcript. However, there's a shining light, because it turns out that day, in the middle of winter, when it was 10 below, January in Chicago, there was a very clean-cut gentleman sitting right behind me, new, with young crew cut, cop shoes, red tie, navy blazer, the whole FBI bit. And I knew exactly who he was. And I said, how are you doing today? What's your name? Wouldn't give it to me. I go, why are you here? Oh, I'm just here to observe. Come on, you knew exactly who he was. And I go, let me guess. You're going back to your office at 219 South Dearborn. He goes, how did you know? It was like so hilarious. So 6 weeks later, all of a sudden that judge was retiring. So yay for getting rid of another.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something I want to make sure that if our viewers do nothing else, please just keep track of these cases. I want to put these docket numbers up on the shows. Jamie, I think you agree with that, right? We have our viewers following these cases. People, you don't need to watch the news. You don't need to watch fake news and all the propaganda, CNN crap that you're fed every day. You want your news? Start following some of these court cases. There's your news right there.
Absolutely. We have so many cases.
Yeah.
We have so many cases that are just like this, constantly, where it is one violation after another, after another, after another. And people, don't want to believe that this is happening. They really don't, but it is. And that is, you're exactly right. Follow these cases and see what is going on, because you're going to see the real deal.
Right. You like to think that a courtroom is a place where you get justice, but it's not. What they've done is to commit the perfect crime. What you do is you first take over the judicial system. You control the judicial system, so you will never get convicted no matter what you do. And all your crimes are buried in paperwork. And then who is going to come up with the money to hire lawyers to dig this up? And who has the legal standing to do it once you find that something's wrong? So this is the perfect crime, okay? And this is what they're doing. I want to, eventually we're going to head back. I've kind of given you all this background information because we were trying to see what cases.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to make this a two-parter episode because you've got a very long and involved story, and I'm loving it because you are showing all the tricks here. But for right now, we'll just have to leave it at this, and you guys just have to follow in on the next episode because I know this is going to get super exciting. Jamie, glad to have you on as my guest co-host. And Joanne,
thank you.
Your legal knowledge is always superb. And Anthony, hang in there. We're going to continue to follow your story.
Okay.
And I want to make this as big as I can. This is wrong, what's being done to you.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
People follow this, and definitely donate to Joanne Dinson's GoFundMe, her Patreon, and so forth, and her blog.
www.marygSykes.com and www.justiceforeveryone.com. Obviously, I have two blogs because maybe someday they might take one down, right?
Absolutely.
Backup, so it's not going anywhere. I'm sure you know that, right, Jamie?
Yeah, I have a couple different sites, and I have to have that because I remember being in Michigan when they got me kicked off of my page, and then I was like, oh, how do you talk?
Facebook does it all the time. Yeah, Facebook does it all the time. You can't depend on Facebook. If you have videos you don't want removed, use Vimeo. And if you have stuff you don't want removed from a blog, you've got to use WordPress. And otherwise, Facebook stuff just disappears off of there all the time. They're really a bunch of weenies. So you got to go with something that you pay and something that doesn't really care about U.S. court orders. Vimeo's not in the U.S., or at least they won't remove anything without a court order because you're paying for it. And WordPress is in the UK, so they don't care what we do here. That's for sure. All right? So if anybody needs to know how to run their blogs or how to protect them, my son is in IT. Actually, I have two sons in IT right now, and they keep everything going for me. All right?
Yeah, I have a foundation too, Family Rights Protection Foundation. We are here to support, love, educate, protect, and assist in any family law, family courts, or juvenile court CPS situations. We are not lawyers. We are advocates, activists, but we can help you to the best that we can before. A lot of times you're not going to have the attorney until way into the court case, until way after the child has been removed or interviewed. So we just try to provide that assistance and guidance from the beginning. So if you need help, please contact us. We do have FamilyRightsProtectionFoundation.org, but you can reach us on Facebook, of course, Family Rights Protection Foundation. And all the information is on there to give us a call at any time.
Okay. And I want to thank all of you for viewing this episode of Family Case Files. I'm your host, V, and catch us next time.